Before starting with the talk, I would like to say something that was forgotten last night in the opening talk about meetings. Just as a general statement, there are two clocks. One is on the corner of the desk when we sit in chairs, and one is between the two mats on the floor. Let us both keep in mind the time so that both of us take responsibility for ending the meeting when there is an appropriate pause or moment. Not to feel rushed by the time, as I said yesterday, but not to leave the responsibility for looking at the clock entirely to me. It belongs to both of us. This is day 1 of the December 88 7-day retreat in Springwater. At the beginning of each retreat, we talk about listening to a talk. What is the quality of the listening to a talk as this? We also say something about authority, and we're questioning our relationship with each other. The relationship of the one who talks and holds the meetings with everyone else. What is our relationship? Or what do we think it is, or imagine it to be? In listening, we're wondering from the very onset right now whether there can be an openness which is not the openness of agreeing when something sounds agreeable and disagreeing when something sounds disagreeable, but an openness to what is being said and the urge to agree or disagree. An openness to the whole process that is unfolding as we are talking/listening. And looking, inquiring together. Is it possible that we meet in that process? So, can one be aware of one's opinions, prejudices, the listener as well as the one who's talking, and not let them enter into the listening, talking? We're not saying it has to be this way. We're wondering if it is possible. Because if we do listen without our opinions and prejudices, what we want to hear and what we're afraid of hearing or saying or looking at, if that can be peripheral, not influential, then we can work together on the same level, not as two different people. Sharing the same listening space, the same open listening space, or wondering space, or looking space. So what is said is not said to bring forth a dogma, something that has to be listened to in order to be remembered, committed to memory, and then thought about and talked about from memory. This is how listening to lectures and giving lectures takes place. The lecture comes from memory. The listening commits what is being said to memory, and compared in the listening to what one already knows. The files in the brain cells are being accessed. One adds to it, and at the moment that one adds to it what one knows, or compares it with what one knows, at that moment of accessing and comparing with memory, one isn't listening to what is being said. The flow has already continued, flow of talk. It's not an easy thing that we're wondering about, whether it can happen. To be here together in the talking, listening, looking, and questioning, regardless of what we know better or differently. It occurs to one, this doesn't sound right, this isn't so, then the memory will hold that instantly, and can one move on from that, not dwell on that. And after the talk is over, there's paper outside on various tables or ledges to write it down and then bring it to a meeting, so that we can start freshly to examine. Maybe what was said was wrong, or not clear, not enough, not whatever. And it's a great joy to me to start looking again, to hear what people have to say, what they feel and think, and just entering into that wholeheartedly. But not let it interfere in the listening right now, because then there can't be any listening. I think that is clear to all of us. And yet to be aware of the movements of the mind as the talk goes on, one may find one hasn't listened at all. Not that one compared what was said with something else. One was just off dreaming or fantasizing. And there's a gap. So one picks it up again as one becomes aware, without any need for putting oneself down or putting the one who's talking down. This is all unnecessary waste of energy and time. Just to pick it up again as the listening is tuning in again, as the attention is there again. Some people are here for the first time, have never heard a talk, maybe have heard a tape, but never been here for a live talk. And there are people who have been here maybe for all the time that we've existed and been at other places where talks used to be given before we had this place, for many years. There is also, can one observe the mind as one hears for the umpteenth time something about listening? Very interesting. Is the mind just naively or innocently open to hear as for the first time what is being said, or what comes out of the mouth? Or is the evaluation or the judgment kicking in? Why do I have to hear this again? I already know what she's going to say. At that moment, something is lost. There's a separation. It may be the same thing, but it may not be the same thing, or it may not be heard in the same way, because we're always different at each moment, and we may hear or see something that we never have heard or said or seen in this way before. Even if the words are very similar or the same, it doesn't matter. The words don't matter so much at all. What matters is the state of being which is open and inquisitive, curious, wondering, looking, not depending on what is known, but talking, listening, looking out of not knowing, which means leaving the files alone, even though they intrude all the time. It's the mechanical operation of the brain to constantly offer files, old files. To see that operation, not fall for it, but listen now to the words and the stillness. Some movements of bodies on mats. The breath, whatever that is when we don't use the word, this amazing process that permeates the whole body. A creaking of the window, of the trees, the plastic outside. So coming back to the point that was being made, what is said here is not any kind of authoritative teaching or stating or dogma. It is there for all of us to look at, to listen to see for oneself if it is so or not so. Not rely on the person who says something that she or he must be right because of their background or reputation. Even though that's what we long to do. Follow someone authoritative, definite or decisive. So we don't have to look, listen, and think for ourselves. It's so much easier to follow and feel so much more secure. It feels that way, but it's a false feeling. Or based on a false assumption that one can just follow without looking for oneself and be secure in that. Because as we do that and have done that so much of our life, something has atrophied in ourselves, which is the ability to stop and attend and question for ourselves, which is a different use of energy than just flowing with someone else's energy and talk and explanation and description and taking that over as one's own without having tested it out from moment to moment. How will one be able to tell whether the person who is talking says what is so, what is true? Through belief, that's what we've done all our life. And there's constant either disappointment that what one has believed is now disillusioned, one is disillusioned in the person whom one has followed so long or so short, because one had the illusion that this person was omniscient or omnipotent or whatever, wise, enlightened. Or one remains sort of incarcerated in one's belief, following but not the space of seeing for oneself. What is the truth of this instant? Not my truth or his or her truth, but what is so? What is the reality of this instant? Undistorted by what I want it to be, or I'm afraid it could be, or maybe. So what is our relationship with each other? I think it is emerging, isn't it? Not the relationship of student to teacher or disciple to teacher, where one waits for the word to come down, but of two people inquiring and looking together. Not getting totally caught up in the words, but listening out of something that is not words, something that is open and unknown. I usually say at this point that personally I feel that the relationship is one of friendship with each other, because it's how I feel about people I work with. There's a very deep feeling of friendship, affection for each other. I was taken up on it a while ago. Someone said, that sounds very hypocritical to me. How could you be friends with everyone in this room? You wouldn't invite them for dinner, would you? I had to think for a moment. I agreed I wouldn't invite everyone in this room for dinner. Actually invite very few people for dinner these days. It's a phase that seems to be a phase of the past. But remembering that phase of the past where we had lots of people over for dinner and were invited for dinner, I don't recall rarely or ever having the depth of communication and questioning that happens in meetings with people that I may not have known before at all. Or maybe have known for a long time, but we never had dinner together. And it doesn't just have to do with Toni's personality. It happens to all of us when we inquire together and look and discover and listen quietly. Then something which is affectionate and friendly, maybe even loving, comes into being. Which has nothing to do with sentimentality or feeling of obligation. By which I'm not saying I expect a person who comes to meeting or listens right now to feel friendly toward me. Please, if you feel angry, allow that feeling to be seen and listened to. This is the essence of what we're doing here, not to impose how one ought to feel or ought to be upon how one actually is this instant and feels, what thoughts and emotions are coming up. To see them, acknowledge them, share them if you wish. I'm very, very open to any kind of emotion brought. Sometimes people have a tremendous urge to vent their anger. Please do so. We can also look at it together. It's an amazing thing to in a meeting to look at anger. We have the idea that is nurtured in us from the countless therapies that have evolved over the years, that the way to deal with anger is one has to express it. Unless one expresses it, it can't abate, or it isn't properly dealt with. Can't be acknowledged unless it is expressed. I'm not saying anything against expressing anger. If it happens, it happens. Usually explosively or underhandedly. But there's a completely different way, which is looking at it. And one may find, as one is interested to find out, what is this thing that I've called anger all the time and feel I should repress or express? What is it? Can it be felt and seen instantly, now as it is evolving? And one may find out without remembering what Toni or anyone else said, that in order to really look at this thing, that's sufficient in itself. That's the whole energy. It doesn't need to be expressed if it is looked at. In which I'm not saying it mustn't be expressed, but it needn't. The direct awareness of what is its own action, is its own expression, if you will. And what is seen in the directness and immediacy of awareness changes. It doesn't remain the same. It undergoes a change. The immediacy of awareness and attention, the directness of it, the energy of it, is the ending of separation from what is, the anger, the fear, and please, let's keep in mind the words or knowledge about anger or fear aren't what is actually happening this instant. It's to name it anger, to say I must express it, or I shouldn't have it, I should control it, or overcome it, that's already the separation from it. And if one looks further to find out, why do I get angry? Why is fear coming up? And looking deeply, tracing it deeply. Not stopping with explanations, but looking as it happens, as it is aroused. One finds it has to do with this very separation, feeling separate from the person who crossed one's ways or threatened one. Feeling separate through clinging to an image of what one is and what the other person is. And when in looking and examining and listening, when this separation disappears in the fullness of attention, then there's nothing to fuel the fear and the anger any longer. It is fueled by the feeling of separation, with all its words and emotions and sentiments and so forth. We'll go into this time and time again during this retreat, because this is what lies at the root of all of our sorrow and discomfort, anger and fear, suffering, and hanging on to pleasure, is this feeling of being separate, a separate entity, a separate individual entity. And we're questioning that completely, all the way. what it actually is. What makes it feel so real? And these are not theoretical, hypothetical questions. They have to evoke in us the looking. One has asked the question, what makes for this feeling of separateness or isolation, loneliness, fear, and so forth? And leave that question sit there and fuel the inquiry, the looking, the listening, as we relate with each other and sit and walk. As thoughts come up, memories come up and flood the whole system. One doesn't have to dig for it. I'm not saying look for something. It comes up on its own. So not to answer any questions theoretically, speculatively, which is what we've been educated to do with questions. The teacher was always happy when we had some kind of an answer. Was better than none. Better than saying, I don't know. Because the teacher is there to make one know something. Most teachers feel uncomfortable when the student says, I don't know. Because then he or she feels they have failed in imparting knowledge. But here we're wondering whether question can function newly, differently, to open up a total inquiry into ourselves and each other and everything in us and around us. What is everything? And wonder. If we know we don't wonder, then we are in that little file room. Comes to mind is a trip many years ago. I probably have told it before. With some elderly people, we were driving to the Grand Canyon. And there are all these turnouts, these marvelous little pathways along a ledge of a rock, where you feel you stand in the middle of this incredible chasm and all its color and depth. And one of the persons who was with us said, you go and look, I'll sit here because I've seen it. That's what we usually do. We sit with our memories of something or somebody. We know this person. We've been with him or with her for many years. We know him or her. We know the Grand Canyon because we've looked at it before. So can one question all memory? Not say I must get rid of it or not, or block it or prevent it from coming up. That's all such futile exercises of the me, of the self. See memory come up, but realize that this is memory, and the memory is not this person, this flesh and blood, living being, who as oneself changes all the time. Different moods, different days, different feelings and emotions and ideas, and maybe a moment without all of that. Maybe a moment of freedom from all of that. And one won't touch that moment of freedom in someone else if one brings to bear all of one's memories of that person. Then we're not in touch with each other. then we're in touch with memory, which isn't right or wrong, but it is not the immediacy of meeting, the depth of it, the infinite depth of it. Because we don't begin and end anywhere. The sound right now of the airplane, the hum there, is that separate? It is separate when we think of what it is, and the thought and the memory becomes predominant in the mind. But if one realizes the thought and memory and image of an airplane is not the sound of it right now, what is that sound without the memory and image? And listen again and again freshly. Seeing at the same time how the mind works to block and separate through its knowledge and our investment in that knowledge. Because by knowing what it is, we are somebody. We become somebody. Every moment we know something and are attached to that knowledge of what we know. That's me, that's us. And what are we without that? It took us years and years to acquire it, and often sweat and tears. In school and wherever one has labored to achieve and acquire knowledge. And we've been praised for it if we were able to gather it, hold it, reproduce it. That's the good student. For the teacher and the parent is also proud and happy. The child brings home good grades which reflect the increase of knowledge and retention of it and the ability to give it back upon request. We have formed ideas about ourselves as knowledgeable people and don't fathom to what degree we're attached to these images. One begins to fathom it as one observes it, when one's knowledge is questioned, disputed, refuted, or someone else has more of it. And the attention of the group goes toward that person, away from oneself. And again, I'm not saying get rid of all of that knowledge. One can't. It's impossible. But just to see what it is as it comes up, to see the identification with it, the attachment to it, to become familiar and intimate with all of that, to shed light into all the depth and variegation of layers and layers of Grand Canyon, exposed to view. And then wonder if the question comes up, is that what I am, what I know, what I remember, what I want to be? And then listen again to the sound of the wind, or the bird, or the plane, or the footsteps in the leaves. Is that knowledge? The trembling of the doors? The words come from knowledge. And there can be an image of those sliding doors trembling. But the sound is not knowledge, is it? Can one see the difference? Listen. People tell me sometimes when I get to this point where there's nothing but the sounds or sights and not a feeling of separation, then very quickly fear rushes in. What am I letting myself in for? Is that the expression, letting myself into? Am I losing myself? Am I falling apart? Am I going to drown in vast space? These are all ideas, aren't they, coming up? Thoughts that one has thought before or recombines from other things that one has read and thought before. And these thoughts create the fear, not the emptiness of listening. An emptiness of listening without any self-reference, there's no fear. Because there's no thought of me who would be afraid of something. This thought is quiet, so there's the emptiness of listening. But the moment thought says, am I losing my mind? Or is this dangerous? That thought then creates feelings. And these feelings create new thoughts. And then one doesn't like those feelings, so there's a separation or conflict with these feelings. And this conflict causes new thoughts and new feelings. Like a moth trying to extricate itself from the web, and by trying to extricate itself, getting more and more entangled. This is what thought does if we try to extricate ourselves through thought. Because thought cannot grasp the emptiness of listening without knowledge. Thought cannot grasp that. That's clear logically, isn't it? Thought can only think about it. But that's not the emptiness of listening, that's thought. And to find out about what something is, aside from the knowledge I have about it, or what somebody is, aside from the remembrance I have about him or her, if I want to find that out, do I realize that thought doesn't help me much? It gets me entangled. Don't accept it, find out and see it as it happens. Discover it and the joy of discovering for oneself how this mind and body and heart and everything works. Somebody asked in a meeting, what are we sitting still for? Which is a very common question of ours. What will this bring me? What will I gain from it? Get out of it? Or what is the purpose of it? This is our conditioned thinking since time immemorial. Not what is something, but what is it good for? What will it get me? actually, this question is unanswerable, isn't it? What is one still for? It is in stillness, not only in stillness, but in stillness, all kinds of movements and thoughts and drives and motives and sounds of wind and birds are revealed very clearly. They're not separate from that stillness. If I'm sitting quietly without moving, having agreed not to move around, at least unless there is some emergency. Incidentally, during a talk, feel free to move. This doesn't hold for a talk, because many people can't sit still this long. So do change the posture of your legs, please, if you're uncomfortable. But here, during a round of sitting, something itches, let's say. And one's whole habitual being wants to scratch that itch, because that's what one has always done. It's the natural or whatever, natural and habitual response to an itch is to scratch it. And it's amazingly interesting to watch an itch, that we're just taking that as an example, to watch an itch which is not being scratched. So one can drop the word itch, one can just listen and feel it with an awareness that also includes the trembling door and someone moving or the breath and this thing called itch. It becomes something completely different, or is felt and seen as something quite different if it is not responded to in our habitual ways. And it also disappears without being scratched. It goes away. In this kind of attention, one may not have even noticed it's having disappeared. Because there's so much going on at the same time. So, in not just sitting in a retreat or so, can one watch as one sits, maybe in a meeting, or I don't just mean a meeting one-on-one, but one has maybe a meeting or talks with people, conversation, maybe for a moment pause and be aware of all one's habitual movements of the hands. One may sit and constantly move one's leg or one's toes up and down. Hands maybe touching the mouth or scratching the head. Usually, when we're not sitting quietly, we don't notice it. We just do it all the time. And why are we doing this? Not to give an answer, but wonder and observe it. As one has to put one's hand on one's head or mouth or scratch the scalp or move the leg around, drum with the fingers. Just to be aware of it, not have an answer for it. And one may find that every one of those habitual things is in attention. One's not aware. One may hum quietly, or tunes. Many people mention this, how they become aware, how tunes are constantly playing in the mind. And It takes one the longest time to even become aware of it, even in a retreat, that there's a tune playing. But by sitting quietly, the tune playing that goes on, but one doesn't drum with one's fingers or scratch one's head, or if one does, there was a moment of complete inattention. One was so into some remembrance or fantasy that this habitual thing took place. Not we shouldn't do these things, but why are we doing them? And by asking this, to include them in this awareness, not have anything too insignificant to be felt, seen, listened to, and wondered about. And one will discover a lot about oneself, how one has images and fears, escapes, and they are tied up with these habits of moving one's mouth, hands, feet. They express this inattentive escape. But these are words. One has to catch it as it happens, with not judgmentally or going after a criminal or a thief, but meeting with a friend. Because in meeting oneself, in one's infinite habits of inattention, one meets everyone. Because we're all possessed of the same inattention with its habits, which don't have to play when there's attention. They're seen and one doesn't have to go on with it. That's such a remarkable discovery one has, that one doesn't have to go on with a habit when it is fully seen. It doesn't have to continue. It serves no purpose other than habit, escape, separation from something, not facing. So now does the question come up, how will I get to this attention that you talk about? Sounds like a good thing to me. But one can't approach it that way. Albeit one can listen to this question coming up. How can I get that? And one's maybe a habitual surge of energy. I'm going to get it. I'm going to find it. An energy evoked by the thought, how can I get it? I will get it. I have to attain it. To see all of that. The attention we're talking about now is not subject to control or technique, ambitious striving. It doesn't happen in those ways. There may be partial attention, but not complete attention. Complete attention is free from striving and effort. Effort of the kind, I want to get that, I have to flex my muscles to attain it, or do this and this and this to achieve it. That kind of way of living and moving is under the sponsorship of the me. I want it, and I have a goal which I want to get, and in that narrow strait there's some attention on the method to get it. So, as these urges and habits come up, can they be exposed? Like the Grand Canyon, seen. And nothing done about them. The seeing is enough. When thought comes in, what will I do about this? Then it's no longer seeing. Then it's habit again. Attention or awareness happens on its own when the mind is open to listen. Not in order to get something, but just open to what's there. Without wanting it to do something for me or fear that it may do something against me. We will end here for today.